for U.S. troops to arrive on the ground. Today, the White House downplayed those denials, though, from Iran.
Despite all of the public posturing you hear from the regime and false reporting, talks are continuing and going well. What is said publicly is, of course, much different than what's being communicated to us privately.
Now, this comes as sources are telling my colleagues here at CNN that the Trump administration is still not sure it's talking to the right people in Iran, meaning it's not clear to U.S. officials whether the Iranian officials that they are speaking with and using as a back channel through Pakistan and Turkey have the ultimate authority to sign off on any peace agreement, let alone implement one. That uncertainty comes as the president has continued to publicly float several major military options, which would carry significant risk for U.S. forces should he take them. He told the Financial Times, maybe we take Karg Island, maybe we don't. We have a lot of options, and it would also mean we had to be there for a while. Karg Island is where 90% of Iran's oil exports flow through, as the president also mused about the notion of the United States potentially taking Iranian oil. He says that would actually be his favorite thing, but he also added this, saying, quote, some stupid people back in the U.S. say, why are you doing that? But he added, they're stupid people. It's an option the president actually raised as far back as 1987 during an interview that he did with Barbara Walters, a clip the president himself reposted today on Truth Social.
How would you do that? Would you send in the Marines? Would you take a chance in a war?
Let them have Iran. You take their oil. That's what
How?
How?
I mean, do we want a war? What do we mean we take their oil?
You go in. You're
How
gonna have
do
a
we
war,
go
Barbara.
in?
You're going to have a war by being weak.
My lead source tonight is CNN political analyst and White House correspondent for the New York Times, Maggie Haberman. And Maggie, obviously, there's a real question of the sense of how the administration is actually feeling about these talks that they keep talking about, because you listen to Rubio and he says, yeah, there's a possibility, but a probability that this doesn't actually work out. But the president himself has sounded very hopeful between last night and today.
Yeah, I think, Caitlin, those two are both reflecting sort of their views of the world generally, and certainly in terms of the Secretary of State, how he views Iran. I think this whole time he has been skeptical that there could be a deal here, and he is making that clear. I also think he doesn't want to get ahead of the president. The president has consistently suggested, well, I shouldn't say consistently because he's also said that they're tapping us along and versions of that, but he has sounded more optimistic about doing what other presidents could not than other members of his administration, certainly for the most part. Whether that's reality or not, we don't know, because there are so many different things coming out of Iran versus the U.S., and some of this obviously is what happens in conflict. It's a bit heightened right now in terms of a whipsaw of statements from the president himself, who, we've talked about this before, he likes what he sees as strategic ambiguity. The problem is that these are men and women serving in the military who do care about their futures. They do care very much about what they're doing and having been part of the U.S. military. But what exactly the end game here hasn't been articulated. There have been several end games mentioned, and it's understandable that the public is confused.
I think few people would say the war in Iraq was a positive. You had him on the aircraft carrier saying all sorts of wonderful things, how the war was essentially over. Guess what? Not over. And, the war with Iraq is a disaster. Now Iran is taking over Iraq.
I'm the only president in 72 years that didn't start a war. The only one. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
No to endless wars.
That was President Trump, time and time again, campaigning against going to war. Now it has been over a month since he did just that in Iran. And then as the president says that talks and peace talks are going well, and that the war could end soon, the Pentagon, we know, is also drawing up scenarios for putting thousands of troops stationed in the Middle East on the ground, though it remains to be seen what happens next and what the president decides. On a timely note, we have just learned here tonight that the Pentagon is set to hold a press briefing about the war in Iran tomorrow morning. It's the first such briefing in 11 days. We've heard from Secretary Hegseth and others at intermittent moments, but this is a briefing from Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, that is slated for 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow.
The war in Iran is at a crossroads. Down to one path is a fast escalating conflict that could widen things further. In a social media post, the president threatened to completely obliterate Iran's energy sites, and then he suggested possibly targeting water desalination plants, a move that could violate international law. Now, in that very same post, Trump also claims that the U.S. is in discussions with a new, more reasonable regime in Iran. It's not clear who that is, though. Iran's government insists that there are no direct talks happening and described the U.S. proposal to end the war as excessive and unrealistic. And in the meantime, Pakistan says it's prepared to host U.S.-Iranian talks in the coming days. But the big question is, with whom? And do they have the power to end this war? A regional source is casting doubt, telling CNN, quote, "No one can tell anyone today that whomever shows up in Islamabad has the power for the Iranian regime." Now, maybe Secretary of State Marco Rubio can clear some of this up.
And if there are new people now in charge who have a more reasonable vision of the future, that would be good news for us, for them, for the entire world. But we also have to be prepared for the possibility, maybe even the probability, that that is not the case. We always prefer to settle things through negotiation and diplomacy. But we also have to be prepared for the fact that that effort might fail, that we are dealing with a 47-year-old regime that still has a lot of people involved in it who aren't necessarily big fans of diplomacy or peace.
We're going to start in our world lead. The status of the Iran war, as told by the Trump administration, seems, to many, an ever-changing tale. This morning, just before markets open, Trump said the U.S. is in serious talks with, quote, a new and more reasonable Iranian regime, but, and there's always a but, he wrote on Truth Social, quote, great progress has been made, but if for any reason a deal is not shortly reached, which it probably will be, and if this Hormuz Strait is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island, and possibly all desalinization plants, unquote. Wow, a lot to unpack here. First, experts say that attacking civilian infrastructure could constitute a war crime under current international law. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked about this afternoon.
Of course, this administration and the United States Armed Forces will always act within the confines of the law. But with respect to achieving the full objectives of Operation Epic Fury, President Trump is going to move forward unabated, and he expects the Iranian regime to make a deal with the administration.
Now, the second point, we still do not know with whom exactly the U.S. is negotiating. No one has heard a peep from Iran's new supreme leader.
It's very opaque right now. It's not quite clear how decisions are being made inside of Iran.
Third, all in that same Truth Social post, the president went from saying there's progress to threatening destruction. And this seems emblematic of the whiplash from President Trump's back and forth statements, and talks about achievement and talks about threats. Though, we should note, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, seemingly frustrated with the news media, challenged the notion that there is any mixed messages or confusing objectives this morning on ABC.
I'll repeat them to you now because I hear a lot of talk about we don't know what the clear objectives are. Here they are. You should write them down. Number one, the destruction of their Air Force. Number two, the destruction of their Navy. Number three, the severe diminishing of their missile launching capability. And number four, the destruction of their factories so they can't make more missiles and more drones to threaten us in the future. All of this so that they can never hide behind it to acquire a nuclear weapon.
Okay, so I did write down those four things, and I will note that there are a couple things not on that initial objectives list that are now being named as objectives, not by Secretary Rubio there, but by other administration officials. For example, retrieving the actual nuclear material from inside Iran, which is reportedly being discussed now as a potential mission for U.S. troops on the ground. Number two, opening the Strait of Hormuz. At the onset of the war, the strait was open. The point is, it's all kind of confusing because objectives are being added as the war changes and the enemy gets a vote, and perhaps things do not go perfectly according to plan. So, 2 Saturdays ago, the president said if Iran does not reopen the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours and allow oil and gas to flow through, he would bomb Iran's civilian electric power plants, which obviously was also not on that list. Either way, just hours before the Monday deadline that President Trump set, before that deadline expired, the president delayed the threat by 5 days. And there was, of course, a caveat.
And if it goes well, we're going to end up with settling this. Otherwise, we'll just keep bombing our little hearts out.
Thursday afternoon, President Trump extended that deadline once again, this time by 10 days. Now, one can support the goals of this war and also acknowledge the confusing messages. President Trump has declared victory while arguing that the mission is not complete. On regime change, the president said that this would be the Iranian people's best shot to take their country back. Then, in recent weeks, President Trump said it was too dangerous for a popular uprising to happen. And then yesterday, he said regime change, that's already happened.
But we've had regime change, if you look already, because the one regime was decimated, destroyed, they're all dead. The next regime is mostly dead. And the third regime, we're dealing with different people than anybody's dealt with before.
So, yes, the previous Ayatollah is dead, but now his arguably more hardline son is now in charge, we think. So if the mission is just, as Secretary Rubio noted, the destruction of the Air Force and the Navy and missiles and missile-making capability, it would seem that the U.S. would be close to accomplishing that. But, according to reports in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, the Trump administration is preparing for more. The Pentagon is preparing for weeks of ground operations in Iran, troops on the ground. President Trump is weighing deploying another 10,000 more ground troops to the Middle East region in general. And they are also considering a complex operation to extract, with boots on the ground in Iran, nearly 1,000 pounds of uranium from inside Iran. We should note the president has not made a decision on any of those options. Again, one can want a denuclearized and democratic Iran and still wonder if President Trump is kind of making some of this up as he goes along. One can support President Trump and wonder if he's fully aware of how often wars spiral out of control little by little with unanticipated responses by the enemy, requiring increasing commitment. President Trump said he would end the Iran war when? When he, quote, feels it in his bones. When so many lives are on the line, that is a remarkably vague and impulsive metric.
Just ahead this hour, President Trump threatens to obliterate Iran's oil wells and power plants unless they reach a deal soon. U.S. crude oil settles above $100 a barrel for the first time since 2022. And I travel to Israel's border with Lebanon as the IDF pushes inside Lebanese territory. We begin with carrot and stick diplomacy out of the White House today on Iran, on day 31 of this expanding conflict. On Truth Social, the president threatened to, quote, completely obliterate Iran's power plants and oil wells if Tehran does not agree to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, he said that the U.S. is talking to a, quote, more reasonable regime. All this as more American troops are arriving here in the Middle East. At the White House, a reporter asked the president's press secretary to square that circle.
Americans sit at home hearing him say, I want to talk, but I keep seeing them send troops to that region. What are they to make of what's going on?
If there's ever a chance for a deal, again, the president is open to listening, but it does not deter him from focusing on the military objectives that he set out 30 days ago and that our military is continuing to achieve day by day.
Kristen Holmes is at the White House. And Kristen, I know this has been a consistent message from the White House that the president puts forces in place in case a deal doesn't work out while pursuing diplomacy. But after all, he did go to war when diplomacy failed. Is any closer to diplomacy now, or are we looking at an expansion of the war in the coming days?
Well, it certainly depends on who you ask. I mean, we heard from Carolyn Levitt. She said these negotiations were going in a positive direction, that they're actually much more positive behind the scenes than they are publicly, because, of course, as we have been reporting, Iran has said there aren't any direct talks happening. They have negated the fact that they've agreed to anything in the 15-point proposal sent over by the United States, something President Trump said that they had agreed to most of. And in fact, they said that it was unreasonable and unreachable when it came to that document. When it comes to President President Trump, he continues to also tout this idea of good negotiations, positivity behind the scenes. But even within his own administration, you're hearing mixed messages. We heard from the Secretary of State, who said it was really unclear who was making the decisions in Iran. Marco Rubio said at one point that they needed to really be focused on the possibility or probability that these talks weren't going to go anywhere, meaning that likely the next step will be some kind of military action in the form of boots on the ground. So whether or not we're actually getting there, it is unclear. And just a reminder, I mean, we have heard nothing publicly from any official on who exactly they're dealing with in Iran. President Trump today told the New York Post that they were talking to the parliamentary speaker, but that's the first time that we had heard that. It was in a one-on-one interview, and even Marco Rubio, who was asked earlier about who they were talking to, said he wasn't going to give out any names because he thought that that might harm them or put them in danger with other people in Iran. We do know there has been a lot of issues figuring out who is in control of what over there since, of course, the fact that most of their leadership was taken out.
Yeah, another risk for leaders identified publicly there. Kristen Holmes, thanks so much. Well, President Trump is once again threatening specifically to attack Karg Island if they do not reach a deal, the U.S. and the Iranians, and if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened. The fortified island handles some 90% of Iran's oil exports. In an interview with the Financial Times, President Trump said his preference would be to, quote, take the oil. The Pentagon is, as we noted, sending more troops to this region. U.S. Central Command says a Navy ship carrying some 3,500 sailors and Marines has now arrived. This comes as Iranian attacks on its neighbors continue. One of those attacks destroyed a U.S. Air Force E-3 Sentry early warning aircraft at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. This image here shows its tail broken off, its distinct rotating radar dome on the ground.
Breaking news, utter confusion. Incredible new reporting tonight as the war in Iran enters its 32nd day. Sources are telling CNN tonight that the Trump administration is not even sure it is talking to the right people in Iran, which is incredible for many reasons. But maybe let's just put one out there, right? Trump is now threatening to bomb desalination plants in Iran, which would put many tens of millions of lives on the line if he doesn't get what he wants. But he's leveling threats like that, not even knowing if he's talking to the right people to get what he wants. It's stunning. And it's unclear if the Iranian officials who are receiving Trump's messages have the authority even to sign off on a peace agreement, never mind the ability to implement it. Now, all of this, of course, is jaw-dropping. And Trump either doesn't know this or he's in denial about it. It's unclear because here's what he posted today. He said, the United States of America is in serious discussions with all caps, a new and more reasonable regime to end our military operations in Iran. Now, of course, it's the same regime that was replaced, right? It's the Ayatollah's son, who's more hardline than the Ayatollah himself, the original supreme leader. So who might this new and more reasonable regime be that Trump is referring to? Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio doesn't seem to know.
It's very opaque right now. It's not quite clear how decisions are being made inside of Iran.
At least that's honesty. Now, one Iranian official is taking a page from Trump's book, though, and getting his message out using social media. You're looking at him there. He's the parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf, and he just tweeted, the enemy promotes its desires as news while threatening our nation at the same time. Big mistake. If they hit one, they'll take several back. Now, that is, in a sense, a page from Trump's playbook. Now, Khalibaf once ran for president of Iran. I visited his campaign headquarters in Tehran back in 2013. He was a popular mayor there at the time. And he's now playing a bit of cat and mouse with Trump. Last night he tweeted, pre-market so-called news or truth is often just a setup for profit taking. Basically, it's a reverse indicator. Do the opposite. If they pump it, short it. If they dump it, go long. See something tomorrow, you know the drill. Pretty interesting to hear this coming from the Iranian regime. And sure enough, early this morning, 2 hours before the markets opened, Trump did what, well, yeah, Khalibaf saw it coming, but so at this point did a lot of other people. Markets were getting really upset. So Trump came out and said, oh, guess what? Great progress has been made. Then, true to Trump's pattern, he threw in some sensational threats, if that progress doesn't continue. He said, if for any reason a deal is not reached shortly, which it probably will be, and if the Hormuz is not immediately open for business, We will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island, and possibly all desalination plants. They love the word obliterating in this administration. And there's that desalination threat again. But Trump is putting more and more American lives on the line. As of tonight, there are more U.S. troops in the Middle East, now over 50,000 service members in the region, thousands more on their way. We've got new images from the USS Boxer, which carries another Marine Expeditionary Unit of up to 2,000 Marines can be in that unit. The Boxer, as I said, on its way, and you can see the crew carrying out a number of military exercises. This is what they're putting out there for us to see. Yet despite the threats and the increasing manpower, Iran is not showing signs of desperation. It took out a U.S. E-3 Sentry aircraft in Saudi Arabia over the weekend, and this was a big deal for a whole lot of reasons, one of which is it appeared to be very clearly an extremely precision strike against one of the most important military assets that the U.S. has on the ground in the region. And analysts say the destruction of this aircraft and its radar could hamper American forces' ability to spot threats by Iran. Those planes are not a dime a dozen, to put it mildly. Meantime, Iran continued to fire missiles towards Israel today. And when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, which has been shut down for a month, going into the 5th week, it'll be this weekend, Iran is now moving ahead with plans to slap tankers going through the waterway with a toll, though, that American and Israeli ships will not be allowed to pay. They're banned. And that toll is at odds with the optimism we're hearing from the administration, because today they were talking about all these tankers going through the strait.
So you wouldn't have seen those tankers if not for the president's diplomacy and his team engaging on this matter, which we expect that compliance moving forward.
Kristen Holmes is out front live outside the White House. And Kristen, a stunning new report from all of our team here at CNN and major questions tonight about who the Trump administration is actually negotiating with, number one, and whether the people that they think that they're negotiating with actually have the power to implement any deal.
Yeah, with most of the regime knocked out, we are hearing that U.S. officials are uncertain of who could actually even make a final deal to end the war in Iran. I mean, there are so many questions that we have had for this White House as to who exactly they're negotiating with. They have not answered that question. Now it seems from this new reporting that the reason for that might have been because those people might not be the people in power who can actually make the decision. And we are told that the Trump administration is casting a wide net with various Iranian officials because of this, but there has been some difficulty in actually getting in touch with these various Iranian officials. They are away from their devices, their phones. They are hunkered down. They don't want to get killed in a missile strike. So that's been part of the complication. Another part of the complication is these indirect messages that are going through Pakistan and Turkey. We are told that the administration, President Trump, is communicating with at least two specific Iranian officials indirectly. One of them being the foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, the other one being who you mentioned, Kalibaf. Kalibaf is seen as one of the only people who might actually have power now because of his relationship with the new supreme leader. But, Aaron, even more complication with that, because there are still so many questions as to what is actually going on with the new supreme leader. We have not heard from him. We have not seen him. U.S. officials have publicly said he might be dead or incredibly injured. So is he actually calling the shots? Iranians are saying, yes, he is calling the shots. And I do want to read one thing for you. This is from a regional source, and I think this is quite striking. It says, no one can tell anyone today that whomever shows up to Islamabad has the power for the Iranian regime. Talking about the Pakistani capital that's been rumored for a potential location for these in-person talks. No one can tell you that the person who shows up actually has the power. I mean, that is just striking, given that we are hearing from President Trump and from the White House, even just today in the briefing, that these negotiations are going very well.
Breaking news, President Trump wants Arab countries to pay for the war he started with Iran. Here's an exchange earlier today with the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
Who's paying for the cost of this war? Will those Arab countries step up to do just that?
Well, I think it's something the president would be quite interested in calling them to do. I won't get ahead of him on that, but certainly it's an idea that I know that he has and something that I think you'll hear more from him on.
Well, if that sounds familiar, it's because it is.
I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Mexico is going to pay for the wall.
Mexico's going to pay for the wall.
Mexico will pay for the wall. I promise.
Now, that was a decade ago. Mexico is still not paid.
And breaking news, Iran strikes a giant oil tanker more than 3 football fields long. Reports are it is still burning. Markets are already responding. The price of oil futures already rising. John Berman here in for Anderson. And the ship in question was hit at a port in Dubai. It is what is known as a VLCC, a very large crude carrier, the kind that can hold as many as 2 million barrels of crude. This one was fully loaded, and again, we are told it is still burning. That is a file picture of the vessel, obviously, before it was hit. We're working to get video from the scene as well as a live report from the region. We will bring that to you shortly. First, though, new reporting on a key question. Is the president creating a credibility gap about talks to end the war? It reveals, among other things, that even as the administration projects optimism about negotiations with Iran, it is not even sure it is speaking with the right Iranians, ones with the clout to make a deal. Something officials, most notably the president, are not sharing with the public, at least not explicitly, not clearly. Though some of their statements, including the president's, do seem to hint that talks may not be quite as advertised. Take his social media post today, which starts out sunny but finishes dark. I'm quoting him now. The United States of America is in serious discussions with a new and more reasonable regime to end our military operations in Iran. Great progress has been made, but then he adds, if for any reason a deal is not shortly reached, which it probably will be, and if the Hormuz Strait is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island, and possibly all desalinization plants, which we have purposely not yet touched. This will be in retribution for our many soldiers and others that Iran has butchered and killed over the old regime's 47-year reign of terror. Again, those are the president's words. So, is this his way of projecting hope while hinting that reality might not justify it, or something else? Unclear. But just taking it at face value, this new and reasonable regime he is speaking about, who are they?
It's very opaque right now. It's not quite clear how decisions are being made inside of Iran.
That is Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying in so many words, we do not know. But to the extent we do know, he also said this.
We are dealing with a 47-year-old regime that still has a lot of people involved in it who aren't necessarily big fans of diplomacy or peace.
So those words, by the way, came just minutes after the president's post about a, quote, new and more reasonable regime, except that his assessment, as you heard, was not more like not so new and not so reasonable. As for the president's threat against Iranian power plants and facilities for making ocean water drinkable, listen to this exchange with the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt.
Under international law, striking civilian infrastructure like that is generally prohibited. Why is the president threatening what would amount to potentially a war crime with the U.S. military? And how do you square that with the administration repeatedly saying that the U.S. does not target civilians?
Look, the president has made it quite clear to the Iranian regime at this moment in time, as evidenced by the statement that you just read, that their best move is to make a deal, or else the United States Armed Forces has capabilities beyond their wildest imagination, and the president is not afraid to use them. That's not what I said, Garrett. Of course, this administration and the United States Armed Forces will always act within the confines of the law. But with respect to achieving the full objectives of Operation Epic Fury, President Trump is going to move forward unabated, and he expects the Iranian regime to make a deal with the administration.
To that end, which of those objectives would destroying a desalinization plant most help?
Haley, go ahead.
Now, she did not rule out hitting such targets. She did, however, say that American air forces have now struck more than 11,000 targets in general since the war began. This is new footage you're looking at from Central Command. What neither they nor Israeli forces have yet accomplished, though, is to entirely prevent further Iranian missile and drone strikes in the region. This is an attack today in Haifa. Nor have they been able to break Iran's grip on the Strait of Hormuz, which is sending the price of oil skyward. Even before this latest strike on that tanker in Dubai, it settled today at $112 a barrel and is driving gas prices within a penny of the $4 a gallon mark here, more than $1 a gallon higher than when the war began. The president has all that to deal with. Clearly, it's a lot, but it's not so much that he can't segue from such questions of dollars and cents and life and death to other things. Just watch him.
it truly is regime change. And regime change is an imperative, but I think we have it automatically. I did something today. We just got these in from the architects. A lot of people are talking about how beautiful the ballroom is. For 150 years, they've wanted to build a ballroom at the White House. And other presidents have wanted it. When we have dignitaries coming like President Xi of China or anybody else, we have very small rooms. Here's another view. This is coming from right opposite the Treasury building. Excuse me, wait. I thought I'd do this now because it's easier. I'm so busy that I don't have time to do this. But I'm fighting wars and other things. But this is very important because this is going to be with us for a long time, and it's going to be, I think it'll be the greatest ballroom.
So busy, and it will have Corinthian columns, he added. Joining us now for more on all that and CNN's new reporting on the negotiations is the anchor of The Source, Chief White House Correspondent Caitlin Collins. Let's not talk about the Corinthian columns, Caitlin. Let's talk about these negotiations, this new CNN reporting about what power the Iranians with whom the United States is negotiating actually have. What are you hearing?
Yeah, it's a real, genuine question inside the administration, John, one that they have been dealing with. And it's really unclear what the outcome of it will be. It depends, obviously, on how these talks go. When it comes to the people that they're speaking with inside of Iran that are having these back-channel talks, that they're passing messages through intermediaries like Pakistan and Turkey to these people. And obviously, you've heard the president say that he believes these talks are going well, that they have been productive. He extended his deadline to bomb those power plants in Iran over this because the talks he believes are going so well. But the question that still remains unanswered, even for this administration, is whether or not the people they are passing those messages on to do have the juice, the power to make an agreement here, to make come to any kind of agreement with the United States should they come to one. And so this is reporting from my colleagues tonight on how even the administration has been struggling with this. I think it's highlighted by the fact that you have not heard anyone except the president name, John, who it is that they are speaking with in Iran. It's something I've questioned the president about directly, that Secretary Rubio was questioned about, Secretary Besant, other officials. And the president himself has confirmed that one of those people is the speaker of the Iranian parliament, at least, that they are talking with. And so it just remains to be seen whether or not that is the person who is the figurehead who can help make an agreement. The president certainly seems to feel more bullish about it, at least publicly, than what we've heard from other officials, where today he was saying that it was a new regime in Iran that he feels that he is able to negotiate with in a better position. And so I think it's still anyone's guess how this ends up and where this goes from here, and whether or not the people that he's speaking with actually have the ability to strike a deal, should they strike one. I mean, I still think Secretary Rubio this morning sounded very skeptical that that could happen. He said they are also preparing not only for the possibility, but the probability that whoever is running Iran is not in a friendlier or more receptive position to the demands that the United States is making.
Yeah, it simply is uncertain as we sit here tonight. Caitlin Collins, thank you so much for your reporting. We're going to see you back at the top of the next hour for The Source. And I know you're going to be talking to our friend Maggie Haberman from the New York Times, among others tonight. So see you shortly. All right, right now you are looking at a picture of the oil supertanker Al Salmi in better times. Right now, in a full load of its oil on fire in a port in Dubai after an Iranian strike. CNN's Matthew Chance has more on this for us now. He joins us live from Doha in Qatar. Matthew, what are you hearing?
Yeah, John, I mean, look, this is exactly the sort of attack that the region and the global oil markets have been so worried about, because this is a really huge supertanker. It's a Kuwaiti flagship. It's about 300 meters long, which is about 3 football fields long. So it's an enormous vessel carrying a maximum capacity of 1.2 million barrels of oil. And we're told by the Kuwaiti news agency, which is reporting on this, that it was fully laden. And so this is an oil tanker that is filled to the brim with perhaps more than 1 million barrels of oil. It's been struck by a drone, according to the authorities in Dubai. It is currently on fire. There is damage to the hull with a potential for an oil spill in the surrounding waters. That's the statement that's been released by the Kuwaiti Petroleum Corporation via their state news agency. Apparently firefighters and emergency workers are on the scene trying to contain the situation as best as they can. There are no injuries that have been reported, and the Dubai authorities in fact say excuse me, that the 24 crew members that were on board have now been brought to safety, so there's no injuries. But you know, look, it comes as Iran strikes out, lashes out at the surrounding Gulf Arab states in response, in retaliation for the attacks that it's suffering from the United States and from Israeli strikes inside Iran. It's lashing out, firing missiles in the past few hours towards Kuwait, towards Saudi Arabia, and drones, of course, which have hit this super tanker in the port of Dubai, John.
The US president makes new threats to Iran. This is what we know. Contradictory remarks from Donald Trump on Iran, sparking fears of a wider war and a devastating economic impact. The president today threatening to completely obliterate Iran's power plants and oil wells if Tehran doesn't agree to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. That's after saying the US is in talks with a new and more reasonable regime. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says it's not quite clear how decisions are being made in Iran, though. Earlier, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, was asked whether targeting civilian infrastructure, such as energy sites, could be considered a war crime.
Of course, this administration and the United States Armed Forces will always act within the confines of the law. But with respect to achieving the full objectives of Operation Epic Fury, President Trump is going to move forward unabated, and he expects the Iranian regime to make a deal with the administration.
CNN's Kristen Holmes is at the White House for us. I mean, it's a legitimate question, isn't it, if the civilian population relies on a power centre and that power centre is taken out?
Yeah, I mean, this was, as this reporter noted, generally is considered illegal and would be considered a war crime to go after these kinds of infrastructures. And it's really unclear what President Trump is doing here because, as you noted, these two things he said in just one post. It wasn't as though they were, moments behind or in front of one another. In the same post that he said that the U.S. was negotiating with a new and more reasonable regime, then he said that if they did not reach a deal, that he would be bombing or completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island, which of course would target civilians. This is not the only point of confusion here. What we heard from the press secretary was this idea that the United States and Americans will know who to believe when it comes to either Iran or the United States. That being because the U.S. continues to say that we're having these positive negotiations, that things are going in a good direction, whereas Iran continues to say that that's not true, that things aren't going in a good direction, that much of the proposal that the United States made was, quote, unreasonable. But there is also this kind of split within the administration as well. It's not just the two opposing sides, Iran and the U.S. It's President Trump and Marco Rubio, for example. When you have President Trump, he is out there saying, he told the New York Post that they were negotiating with the parliamentary speaker. You have the Secretary of State saying he doesn't want to say who is doing the negotiating for Iran because they're worried that person's life will be in danger. You have President Trump saying this is a new reasonable regime. You have Secretary of State Marco Rubio calling the Iranians that they're dealing with lunatics. So where these two things marry, that is the big question here, and one we have not been able to get to the bottom of. And of course, all of this is happening on the backdrop of the idea that President Trump and the White House, the administration as a whole, has not ruled out putting troops on the ground. And it certainly seems as though that is the direction that this is heading in as we kind of hear these threats escalating from President Trump.
Kristen, appreciate it from the White House there. Well, what we don't know is, will President Trump go through with these threats on Iran? Joining us now is our global affairs commentator, Sabrina Singh. Thanks for joining us. I mean, it was an interesting question, wasn't it, about the war crimes angle to attacking energy infrastructure, because inevitably there'll be a knock-on effect on the civilian population.
Yeah, it's good to be with you. I think any attack on energy infrastructure could be considered a war crime. I mean, there's no military objective to hitting energy infrastructure or desalination plants that millions of not only Iranians rely on, but those in the region, including in Saudi and Qatar. So, when we look at what these administrations' objectives are that, continue to be ever changing, but if we just look at the pure military objectives and what they've laid out of destroying their Navy and their ballistic missile programs and potentially addressing that their nuclear program as well, Energy infrastructure is something that would lie outside of that, and I think deserves a lot of criticism and a lot of scrutiny if that is something that the administration plans to pursue.
But it would potentially be a known goal going for oil infrastructure in particular, wouldn't it? Because that would take more oil out of the global market, and, you know, that is the issue in the West right now.
Well, that's exactly right, too. I mean, this would not only put just more stress and severe pressure on oil markets, it would cause gas prices here in the United States to rise. It would cause fertilizer prices to go up for farmers all over the world. And then you're going to see countries, particularly those in Asia, that are already impacted by liquefied natural gas not being able to get out of the region because they rely on it so much, turning to alternate energy sources such as coal, which is, as we know, very dirty. So the impact of hitting energy infrastructure is not only, like you said, going to have impacts on the oil and gas prices in the market, but it's going to have catastrophic effects for the region and potentially very long-term impacts for the global markets, and something that we probably won't recover from for many years.
I also wanted to ask you, Sabrina, about what Spain's foreign minister said today, that the US war with Iran profoundly illegal and profoundly unjust, also saying that Spain will not allow US military aircraft to fly through Spanish airspace or use Spanish bases to attack Iran. They're really not, well, they're completely resisting pressure from President Trump. A very bold move.
Yeah, it's quite interesting what you're seeing Spain doing. At first, it was the United States can't use, I believe it was 2 of the bases in Spain, but now they're closing all airspace, which does present some challenges for the United States. Ultimately, that's a sovereign decision that Spain is making. I think the fear that Spain is likely considering is, what is the retaliation going to be from this administration? I mean, we know Donald Trump uses the threat of tariffs as a lever of power that he can pull at any time. I would expect at some point that we see some type of Truth Social post going after Spain and potentially, putting more tariffs on that country to raise costs for them. At the end of the day, this type of escalation, on the United States part, if we do resort to some type of tariff measures against our own ally, isn't good for anyone. And so, what you really want to see here is some diplomatic talks happening behind the scenes to try and de-escalate the situation, to try and get Spain to potentially open up their airspace. Maybe it's not using their bases, but their airspace, and trying to calm the tensions. But I fear tomorrow we might be waking up to a Truth Social post from the president really going after Spain and their economic interests as well.
Yeah, you can definitely see that. CNN Global Affairs commentator Sabrina Singh, really appreciate it. Thank you. Now, an Israeli oil refinery was struck by a missile today near the city of Haifa. Israeli officials say the missile was intercepted, but pieces of it still struck a storage facility that's located near the main base of the Israeli Navy. It was unclear if the missile was fired by Iran or by Hezbollah militants in Lebanon. Israeli President Isaac Herzog is condemning a surge in settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. He's vowing to bring those responsible to justice, saying, quote, grave offences against innocent people undermine the rule of law. Accountability is rare for the near daily attacks against Palestinians and their homes, their cars, their land. The UN Human Rights Office says the violence is coordinated and strategic, accusing Israeli authorities of playing a central role in directing, participating in, or enabling the attacks. Now, a CNN team covering the settler violence witnessed the military's role firsthand. After a brutal attack on Palestinians last week, soldiers stepped in but targeted our journalists and Palestinians instead of the assailants. The IDF has now suspended the battalion involved. Here's a brief reminder of what happened to Jerry Diamond and his crew.
Producer Abir Salman identifies us as journalists before translating the soldiers' commands.
Sit down, sit down, sit down.
So the soldiers just immediately came up and started pointing their weapons directly at us, telling everyone to sit down immediately. Obviously, we're not posing any threat here.
The commander comes straight for our camera, and within seconds, a soldier has just put photojournalist Cyril Theophilus in a chokehold, forcing him to the ground.
Don't touch him like that. Don't touch him like that. Give me my phone.
Jeremy joins us now from Tel Aviv. I guess, Jeremy, you didn't seem very shocked at what was happening, but it is rare to actually see this on camera, and that's what led to the accountability in this case, do you think?
Yeah, it certainly is a big factor in all of this. I mean, we've seen the steps that the Israeli military has taken have been fairly unprecedented, both in speed and in scope. You know, within about 48 hours of our report airing, the Israeli military's chief of staff took personal responsibility of this investigation and decided to suspend the entire battalion, that's hundreds of soldiers, from operational activity in the West Bank, sending them for training for an undetermined period of time. One of the soldiers who spoke to us in that report has been dismissed from the IDF altogether. Another, the one who assaulted my cameraman, Cyril Theophilus, he is now under investigation by Israel's military police unit. We will be tracking that. But as you say, a lot of this has to do with the fact that it was caught on camera. It has also to do with the fact that we've seen this growing settler violence that has unsettled the Israeli security establishment in recent weeks. But I think we also have to be honest that it has to do with the fact that we are journalists working for an American news network, working for CNN, because too many times, Max, we have seen total lack of accountability as it relates to similar incidents involving Palestinian journalists and involving Palestinian civilians. There are many times where the Israeli military says they are going to launch a review or an investigation of a certain incident, and ultimately we don't see any kind of disciplinary action taken, as we saw in this case. And it is, you know, the bigger picture here is seeing a concrete plan from the Israeli military to tackle this huge surge in settler violence. You know, since the war with Iran began, we have seen 7 Palestinians who've been killed by Israeli settlers, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. That's nearly as many Palestinians were killed by Israeli settlers in 2025 altogether, when that number was 9, according to the United Nations. So you can see the massive surge that is happening in that. And in many cases, as we saw in our conversations with these soldiers, the Israeli soldiers are taking a page right out of the settler playbook, supporting Israeli settler actions. And in this case, you know, as one soldier told me, trying to protect one of these illegal outposts with the hope that one day it will be legalized by the Israeli government. And that's exactly what we've seen over the course of the last 2.5 years, as this Israeli government has legalized dozens of illegal outposts that were established by Israeli settlers on the ground, sometimes protected by Israeli soldiers. And so that is the pattern that we have seen. And while we certainly saw the Israeli military take swift action in our case, we are still waiting to see what the broader pattern of behavior is and whether it will change at all.
With our world lead, the Israeli military's top general today suspended all operation activities of an Israeli reserve battalion that was involved in detaining and assaulting a CNN team in the West Bank. Last Thursday, CNN's Jeremy Diamond and his team were covering the aftermath of a violent assault by Jewish settlers in West Bank who had established an illegal outpost in a West Bank village. The soldiers detained the team, the journalists, and one of the soldiers placed CNN photojournalist Cyril Theophilus in a chokehold. Now, during the CNN team's detention, several of the Israeli soldiers said on camera that they believe the entire West Bank belongs to Jews and that they were avenging the alleged killing of an Israeli settler days before. The assault of the CNN crew is a mere symbol of the out-of-control violence being perpetrated by Israelis, Jews, many of them religious zealots, on innocent Palestinians in the West Bank. It's an eruption of violence that the Netanyahu government too often seems to be allowing, if not outright supporting. It was a busy weekend in Israel. On Sunday, Israeli police prevented a Roman Catholic cardinal and other senior church leaders from entering Jerusalem's Church of the Holy Sepulchre to celebrate Palm Sunday Mass, the first time this has happened in centuries. Prime Minister Netanyahu later reversed the decision after a global outcry.
Meanwhile, we are seeing more exchanges of missiles between Israel and Iran. Video geolocated by CNN shows several large explosions in Esfahan, Iran. The overnight bombardment comes on the heels of Israel, Jerusalem. Smoke trails left by intercepted missiles could be seen across the sky. Meanwhile, the White House says talks to end the war with Iran, which now in its second month are, quote, going well, despite Tehran denying that they're happening at all.
Anything that they say to us privately will be tested, and we will ensure that they are being held accountable to their word. When the president says more reasonable, again, these folks are appearing more reasonable behind the scenes privately in these conversations than perhaps some of the previous leaders who are now no longer on planet Earth because they lied to the United States.
Meantime, Secretary of State Marco Rubio doubled down on Trump's stance that they are dealing with more reasonable negotiators in Tehran. But he admitted it's not quite clear how decisions are actually being made in Iran.
Well, I'm not going to disclose to you who those people are because it probably would get them in trouble with some other groups of people inside of Iran. Look, there's some fractures going on there internally. And if there are new people now in charge who have a more reasonable vision of the future, that would be good news for us, for them, for the entire world. But we also have to be prepared for the possibility, maybe even the probability, that that is not the case.
Now, despite claims by the administration that it is making diplomatic headway with Iran, President Trump is threatening to obliterate Iran's energy sources if a deal to end the war is not reached and the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. Here's what the White House had to say about that.
Of course, this administration and the United States Armed Forces will always act within the confines of the law. But with respect to achieving the full objectives of Operation Epic Fury, President Trump is going to move forward unabated, and he expects the Iranian regime to make a deal with the administration.
CNN's Christy Lou Stout is live in Hong Kong for us. Christy, what more can you tell us about that oil tanker in Kuwait? What do we know?
Well, Alex, this was a fully laden Kuwaiti oil tanker. It was hit off the coast of Dubai, and this is one of the most significant strikes on a vessel since the war in the Middle East began, and it comes after those threats being made by U.S. President Donald Trump, threatening to target civilian infrastructure across Iran if Iran doesn't reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And as if on cue, the price of oil just keeps rising and rising. In fact, U.S. crude settled above $100 a barrel for the first time since July of 2022. It was shortly after midnight. That was when this Kuwaiti oil tanker was hit off the coast of the UAE. There were many fears of an oil spill. Some 24 seafarers were on board. They were reported to be safe. And we've been monitoring the Dubai media office that's been providing updates on X. Let's bring up one of the updates. The Dubai media office saying this: authorities in Dubai confirmed their response to an incident involving a drone affecting a Kuwaiti oil tanker and been extinguished. And this strike, this incident happened after U.S. President Donald Trump took to Truth Social and posted additional threats against water infrastructure, against energy infrastructure in Iran. We have the post for you, and this is what the president sent out. He said this, quote, "If the Hormuz Strait is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island, and possibly all desalination plants, which we have purposely not yet touched," unquote. Now, Karg Island is tiny, but it's just a third of the size of Manhattan, but it has an outsized economic impact for Iran. It's Iran's economic lifeline. Some 90% of its oil, its crude exports flow through Karg Island. So any strike on Karg Island would represent a major escalation in this conflict, and any strike on a civilian infrastructure installation would constitute a war crime under international law. Now, meanwhile, we continue to follow events in the battlefield across the Middle East. In Iran, at least 2 people were killed when, according to Iranian state media, an orphanage was targeted. The city of Isfahan, some dramatic social media video has been pouring out of there. That city is under bombardment right now. In Lebanon, 3 UN peacekeepers from Indonesia were killed in 2 separate incidents. And in Israel, an oil refinery complex was hit by debris from an intercepted attack. So far, this war, now 5 weeks in, has killed thousands of people across the Middle East and wreaked havoc on global markets. This, as Iran continues and maintains its iron grip on the Strait of Hormuz. Alex.
With us, the top story is in the Persian Gulf, where Kuwait state media is reporting that Iranian strikes hit a large Kuwaiti crude carrier anchored in Dubai. Officials from Dubai confirmed that response teams have put out the fire on board that oil tanker. No injuries have been reported. All 24 crew members are safe. Kuwait's Petroleum Corporation says the tanker was fully loaded, and now there are concerns of the possibility of an oil spill. CNN's Matthew Chance has more from Doha.
this is exactly the sort of attack that the region and the global oil markets have been so worried about, because this is a really huge supertanker. It's a Kuwaiti flagship. It's about 300 meters long, which is about 3 football fields long. So it's an enormous vessel carrying a maximum capacity of 1.2 million barrels of oil. And we're told by the Kuwaiti news agency, which is reporting on this, that it was fully laden. And so this is an oil tank. It's been struck by a drone, according to the authorities in Dubai. Again, it comes as Iran strikes out, lashes out at the surrounding Gulf Arab states in response, in retaliation for the attacks that it's suffering from the United States and from Israeli strikes inside Iran. It's lashing out, firing missiles in the past few hours towards Kuwait, towards Saudi Arabia, and drones, of course, which have hit this super tanker.
Our thanks, Matthew Chan.
In order to make a deal, any deal, you have to know who you're talking to, and that if both sides agree, that it means something. And that's what makes CNN's new reporting tonight so significant. It says that the Trump administration is unsure if they're speaking with the right people in Iran, which you'll remember does not line up with what the president has been claiming for the past week.
It's really a new regime. It's a new group of people that we've never dealt with before, that are acting very reasonable. We have very substantial talks going on with respect to Iran, with the right people. We're actually talking to the right people, and they want to make a deal so badly.
Yeah, see, the problem is no one seems to know who holds the cards right now in Iran. Top leadership has been wiped out. It's not clear if the new supreme leader is even dead or alive. Communications within Iran have been decimated, and mediators from other countries are having trouble contacting top Iranian officials who are avoiding phones because they're afraid of being tracked and killed. Secretary of State Marco Rubio put it this way.
It's very opaque right now. It's not quite clear how decisions are being made inside of Iran.
So who is the Trump administration actually talking with? The sources tell CNN they've been indirectly exchanging messages with Iran's foreign minister and the Iranian Speaker of Parliament. But publicly, the Iranians are telling a very different story. The foreign ministry says there are no direct negotiations with the U.S. so far, and a spokesperson described Trump's 15-point plan as unrealistic and unreasonable. Iran's Speaker of Parliament is not putting it quite as diplomatically. He posted this today: Iran's enemies pass off their wishes as news while simultaneously threatening our nation. They're dead wrong. If they strike once, they'll get hit several times back. And the White House claims the public rhetoric does not match what they're hearing privately.
Despite all of the public posturing you hear from the regime and false reporting, talks are continuing and going well. What is said publicly is, of course, much different than what's being communicated to us privately. And these folks are appearing more reasonable behind the scenes privately in these conversations than perhaps some of the previous leaders who are now no longer on planet Earth because they lied to the United States.
And now there's another layer. We're learning that some Iranian officials just don't trust that the U.S. is negotiating in good faith, because earlier rounds of talks appeared to make progress right before Trump approved a massive wave of airstrikes. Social media posts from the president this morning, they probably don't help. He's talking up what he calls great progress with discussions. At the same time, he's threatening to strike Iranian energy infrastructure and desalination plants, which is considered civilian infrastructure. And tonight, there are more than 50,000 U.S. troops in the region. The president's deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face attacks on energy sites is April 6th. So that's 1 week to answer the question his own administration cannot answer. Are they talking to the people who can actually make a deal stick?
Their best move is to make a deal, or else the United States Armed Forces has capabilities beyond their wildest imagination, and the president is not afraid to use them. Of course, this administration and the United States Armed Forces will always act within the confines of the law. But with respect to achieving the full objectives of Operation Epic Fury, President Trump is going to move forward unabated, and he expects the Iranian regime to make a deal with the administration.
That was White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt's response today when she was asked about a threat that the president issued earlier, claiming that the United States would obliterate Iran's power and utility infrastructure, including electric plants, oil wells, Karg Island, and possibly water desalination plants if a deal is not agreed to with the United States. Now, legal experts say that targeting these plants could constitute a war crime under international law because they're generally considered civilian infrastructure. And the president's threat comes as a U.S. Navy ship that is carrying roughly 3,500 sailors and Marines has now arrived in the region. Those sailors are under the control of U.S. Central Command, which was once led by my next source here tonight, former CENTCOM commander, retired four-star General Joseph Votel. And it's great to have you here, sir, especially with your expertise on this. First, can I ask you, what does happen if the president follows through on that threat to strike power and water plants in Iran?
Yeah, thanks, Kaylin. It's good to be with you. Well, I think if we go after these kind of energy-related targets or infrastructure-related targets, it certainly invites Iran, the regime, to do the same. And we know they've already demonstrated the capability of doing that. So we risk further destruction of similar type capabilities with our Gulf partners, really across the region. And secondly, of course, as has been raised in a number of different forums here, it also invites scrutiny on the United States and allegations of us not operating in accordance with international humanity with this.
Tonight, thousands more of American troops have arrived in the Middle East as President Trump is toggling between two drastically different trajectories for the war against Iran. On one hand, the president is taking his threat to completely obliterate Iran's energy sites even further, now suggesting that the United States could possibly target water desalination plants in a move that could cut off the clean water supply to tens of millions of ordinary Iranians and, as critics will note, could amount to a war crime. In that same post, though, as you keep reading, the president also argued that great progress is being made in what he described as a serious discussion with a new and more reasonable regime in Iran. That echoes what he told reporters last night on Air Force One.
We've had regime change, if you look already, because the one regime was decimated, destroyed, they're all dead. The next regime is mostly dead. And the third regime, we're dealing with different people than anybody's dealt with before. It's a whole different group of people. So I would consider that regime change. And frankly, they've been very reasonable. So I think we've had regime change.
And also for the first time tonight, the president is naming that third regime, as he describes it there, that he says his administration has been dealing with. The president confirms what we had largely suspected. It's the Speaker of Iran's parliament, Mohammad Ghalibaf, who President Trump told the Financial Times that the United States will find out in about a week if Ghalibaf is someone that it can truly negotiate with. This is what the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said about that front today.
Well, I'm not going to disclose to you who those people are because it probably would get them in trouble with some other groups of people inside of Iran. Look, there's some fractures going on there internally. If there are new people now in charge who have a more reasonable vision of the future, that would be good news for us, for them, for the entire world. But we also have to be prepared for the possibility, maybe even the probability, that that is not the case.
Now, on that note, Iranian officials are still denying that talks are even happening between the United States and Iran. And Ghalibaf, who is the Iranian parliament speaker, accused President Trump of signaling negotiation in public while secretly plotting a ground attack in private, as he warned that Iranian forces are ready and waiting for U.S. troops to arrive on the ground. Today, the White House downplayed those denials, though, from Iran.
Despite all of the public posturing you hear from the regime and false reporting, talks are continuing and going well. What is said publicly is, of course, much different than what's being communicated to us privately.
Now, this comes as sources are telling my colleagues here at CNN that the Trump administration is still not sure it's talking to the right people in Iran, meaning it's not clear to U.S. officials whether the Iranian officials that they are speaking with and using as a back channel through Pakistan and Turkey have the ultimate authority to sign off on any peace agreement, let alone implement one. That uncertainty comes as the president has continued to publicly float several major military options, which would carry significant risk for U.S. forces should he take them. He told the Financial Times, maybe we take Karg Island, maybe we don't. We have a lot of options, and it would also mean we had to be there for a while. Kharg Island is where 90% of Iran's oil exports flow through, as the president also mused about the notion of the United States potentially taking Iranian oil. He says that would actually be his favorite thing, but he also added this, saying, quote, "Some stupid people back in the U.S. say, why are you doing that?" But he added, they're stupid people. It's an option the president actually raised as far back as 1987 during an interview that he did with Barbara Walters, a clip the president himself reposted today on Truth Social.
How would you do that? Would you send in the Marines? Would you take a chance in the war?
Let them have Iran. You take their oil. That's what
How?
How?
I mean, do we want a war? What do you mean we
in,
take their oil?
You go in. You're
How
gonna have
do
a
we
war,
go
Barbara.
in?
You're going to have a war by being weak.
My lead source tonight is CNN political analyst and White House correspondent for the New York Times, Maggie Haberman. And Maggie, obviously, there's a real question of the sense of how the administration is actually feeling about these talks that they keep talking about, because you listen to Rubio and he says, yeah, there's a possibility